It's time for Talkward, Cringeworthy Tales. And now, your host, weekly humorist, editor-in-chief, Marty Dundix.
Hi, and welcome to Talkward. I'm Marty Dundix, editor-in-chief of Weekly Humorist magazine, and this is Talkward, a fun little podcast where professionally funny people come to tell awkward and cringeworthy stories. I'm so excited about today's guest, and I read her book a bunch of months ago for my book club, and she was finally able to do today's podcast. I'm so happy to have Jen Spyra on today's show. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Marty, thank you. I didn't know that you read it for your book club. That's awesome. Marty, you're holding it.
This is the book. It's called Big Time. It's by Jen. This is your first book, right? And you've been a comedy writer for a long, long time. And you're so funny. And you're also a talented voiceover artist. And you do tons of voiceover work. And you've been in the New Yorker, and you're a writer for The Onion. And I think you've done UCB. Is that right?
Yes.
So you're a comedy aficionado. And now you're writing the first book, which is a huge... Now that the first book is done, is it like, well, that was easy. I can write 10 more of those.
Well, it is true that now, okay, so you say first book. It is the first book, and it's a short story collection. But now I feel like there's a bigger kahuna to take down, which is the first novel. So now I'm working on that because it did, like, with the short story collection, every story that I wrote that was, it did feel like writing stories got easier because I would write really longer ones, and then like an 8-pager would feel like, oh my God, that's like no big deal, because I'd write a 30-pager, and then the longest one in there is kind of like a novella. It's like 90 pages. And so once I did that, it did make the shorter ones, they felt like way easier lifts.
Are they way too short? Because I'm familiar with your work. I've seen you perform readings of some of them. My favorite one is called Dinner at 8, which is one of my favorite stories that you've written.
I remember doing that. That was scary.
That was great. You were so wonderful. And the reading show is called A Night of Humorous Readings, which is done in New York City by a group of wonderful guys. Hi to James Folta out there and his wonderful site, Points in Case. Not as good as Weekly Humorist, but that's okay. It's okay. We're in competition. No, I'm kidding. It's all the same people. But that's a great show, and they have an email list of all the top humor articles of the week. And you performed Dinner at 8 on that show, and I think maybe that might have been during the Satire and Humor Festival, or you might have done a different reading at the Satire and Humor Festival, because you were definitely on a panel at the Satire and Humor Festival that I was there for.
I was. It's funny because I think whatever I did for that, I mean, there were 2 times when I did ones that it was scary because with Dinner at 8, initially there's a sort of, I'm tricking the reader and making you think that I'm rabidly anti-Semitic. And so like when you're doing it on stage for like a solid minute, you're just living in that. And like no one knows you're gonna.
They're like, she's kidding, right? This is all a joke, right? The punchline's happening soon, and then it doesn't happen. You're like, oh.
No, it doesn't happen for a while, and you're like, what the fuck is this? Actually, the person, a celebrity, reads it on the audiobook. This guy, the actor Dan Stevens, he's this like amazing actor. I'm obsessed with him. And he said when he got the material from his agent, he started reading that story, and he was like, what the fuck did they say? Like, obviously, I can't read this incredibly hateful stuff, right? but it's not. And I'm Jewish. I feel like I should say that.
You have a lot. I mean, and so many of your stories are, they're very dark and twisted, and they explore at times. They go into uncomfortable territory, but there's always such a great turn. There's always a great twist, and the way that I read all of your work is in what you sound like to me, because I've seen you perform. So it's never in my voice. It's always in your voice. And your voice is also the voice that I hear when I watch Colbert at night. And I hear the introduction. And it's The Late Show with Stephen Colbert tonight. And it's always you. And that's the voice I hear when I read this whole book. It was your voice, because of that. And because of that, I think if people know you and know your work, it's better. It's a better experience reading your work. Because your voice adds a layer of humor in addition to the written word, because your voice is so friendly and warm, and it has that sort of tone that's like everything's okay. So you're getting this kind of everything's okay friendliness, and then the content's really dark and twisted, and that makes it so much funnier.
Wow, you really put your finger on something. I mean, it's true that maybe when I do readings and stuff, you already it already feels, yeah, like I'm friendly, and I'm also not, I'm mentally stable, and I don't seem like a hateful, aggressive person, because you're right, just on the line, if you don't know where this person's coming from and where it's going, you're like, I mean, then I guess you get the hang of it pretty quickly that
Yeah.
I'm going to keep doing these turns and stuff. But yeah, I love, Marty, that it adds a dimension for you like that.
Definitely. Oh, it's great. It's great. How did you start? I feel like your writing is so good and has such fun details. And I've noticed little details. Oh, do I have it? Hold on. I think I just put it back. I had something I wanted to show you in the office, and I don't think I have it. No. It's okay. Oh.
Guys, for the listeners, Marty has a lot of really cool adult toys, not sex toys, but toys for adult
Adult toys. I don't know if I'd call a Voltron an adult toy, but okay.
Okay, sorry.
I mean,
You're right.
maybe.
I realize adult toys are only sex toys, but that's
It's
not
not
it.
though. Oh, I thought this was a Sony,
Oh
but it's
my
actually
God!
it's actually a Panasonic. This is a sport Walkman.
Oh, that's
Yellow.
so. Is it? Yeah, seriously. Okay, I was thinking. I was like, what is a product that I have in the book somewhere that? Oh, that's so cool. Yes, in one of the stories, a big thing that a character wants. It's a story that's set in. It's sort of loosely set in the '90s, the mid '90s, and he really wants a banana yellow Sony Walkman. Marty just showed me a beautiful banana yellow.
Banana yellow, and it's the waterproof
Yeah.
kind. And I forgot, like these would lock. So the
Oh.
difference between the sport Walkman and the regular Walkman was it was rubberized, and it had a lock on it so that you could open and close, and you would lock your cassettes. So if it got wet, they wouldn't get ruined. And I was rereading the book, and I was simultaneously cleaning my apartment, and I came across a banana yellow Walkman. And I was like, that's a funny detail that you put in this book, and it's a real thing that people still have. If you're me and you're a hoarder, and you have things like Walkman lying around your apartment. But sometimes I have cassettes that I have to be like, what is on this cassette? So I put it in the Walkman, and I push it into the computer, and I'll dub it into like an MP3 just to have a record of it.
Viewers, or listeners, what you can't hear, or what you can hear but not see, is that Marty is actually 71 years old.
71 years old. I sound great for a 71-year-old man.
Yeah.
Just puttering around my Brooklyn brownstone. Never leave.
Nice.
Yeah.
That'll work.
It's grimy. It's grimy old brownstone.
Oh.
You live in New York City, don't you?
I certainly do. I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Wow, fancy.
I live really close to R.L. Stine.
Oh, nice. Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I have been inside his building, not to see him, but I've been in there. It is a good building, and he is a fellow Upper West Sider. Because I only mention that because the Walkman that Marty very kindly mentioned is from a story that I base on a real Goosebumps R.L. Stine book called Monster Blood. But yeah.
There's R.L. Stine. It's a very small world because another person I've talked to in the podcast world who is an old comedy person is Sam Viviano, who is the old art director of Mad Magazine. And he, maybe retired from Mad maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But he was there for like 20, 30 years. And before he worked at Mad, he worked with R.L. Stine when R.L. Stine was, I think, going by a different name than the Goosebumps. And they worked at a magazine together. And they were doing, he would illustrate his stories for these preteen, teen magazines. And it's just like tons of stories. He was like these great stories about, and then the guy started doing Goosebumps instead, and that kind of took off.
God bless him. I'm so glad he did. That's really, really cool.
So how did you start? Oh, what kind of a person were you like in middle school? I'm always interested. I feel like I developed a lot of my comedy sensibilities and just like the way that I see the world. My worldview kind of was made, I think, when I was in like 8th grade. And I was just kind of like this dopey, outsider, artsy, funny kid who was like watching a ton of like comedies, watching all the reruns on Comedy Central and watching like old episodes of Soap or Kids in the Hall or old SNL or
Yeah.
MST3K, and that kind of influenced everything that I would do as I got older. So, what were you like? What got your comedy tastes going when you were like a kid to make you the kind of a writer that you are now?
I love that you said it specifically in middle school, and it's funny because I feel like I'm actually I'm unlike most of my friends in comedy. Most of the people that I know, that work in comedy, they all were like obsessed with late night shows as kids, and they definitely were obsessed with SNL as kids. And I, I mean, I really only got into like stuff that was legit comedy in high school. Like, I mean, Kids in the Hall and Strangers with Candy
Mm-hmm.
and Monty Python, that kind of stuff. I only discovered in high school. So from before that, I was only weird in that I always really, really liked old Hollywood, and I really loved old movies, and I love noir, and I love obviously just the classics. And that was the only thing where none of my friends were into these movies, and I would just watch them alone. And so I that was the only thing that was like, oh, that's otherwise I was in lockstep with my friends watching Varsity Blues, and I remember specifically sitting in the theater when Varsity Blues, when it was coming on, and there was like a little logo that said, this is like an MTV movie, and just being like, oh my God, they're going to get it. It's going to be so fucking cool. Like totally unironically. So I definitely loved like normal culture, but the outsider perspective was really just old Hollywood stuff. And I also just loved serious 19th century, English and American novels.
Yeah.
And I liked serious stuff.
I picked up early, reading in big time, a lot of stuff that was similar to me, where when I was a kid, I came from a long line of like mystery readers. So like my grandparents, my mom always liked paperback mysteries everywhere. All of the Agatha Christie I read when I was like 11, all the old Sherlock Holmes and stuff. And then I would watch old movies with my grandmother, and we'd watch like Gilda, and we'd watch like just like all the old real noir, like great old stuff with like a young Vincent Price or all those kind of old movies, and they're great. And I picked up a lot of that in your writing because you're poking some fun at Ten Little Indians, little Agatha Christie stuff, real stereotypical like her characters and the murder, and you're at a house and the Sherlock Holmes short piece with the swiping right, so funny, and the woman's matched when she's dating Sherlock Holmes, and that's so good. And then the big story, Big Time, is so wonderful with I love the old Hollywood attitude of Ruby Russell, and she's such a great character. And I reread Big Time, the short story, just earlier today, just because I read it a couple of months ago, and I wanted to reread, and I wanted to make sure I got all the fun details. And that story is so good.
Dude.
Like, that could be its own book. Obviously, you know that. And I hope that story is going to be its own movie or TV show soon, because I'm like reading it and I want to watch it.
I am working on that because yes, there have been movements towards that direction, because awesomely some other people also think the same thing. And I mean, as it wasn't the idea when I was writing it, but then as I sort of, as the scope of it grew, and I just like loved her and I loved writing as her, I was like, oh, I can see this as a movie, and I think it could sustain that. But yeah, all that old stuff. Literally last night, I'm looking for it. Yeah, I was about to just pick up, like, I loved Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I loved reading the Sherlock Holmes stories. And I have, one of the old books that I actually was the first one that I actually read it in. It's like super old. I had Gorilla Glued the spine back on because it fell off. But I love reading in this old, like hard cloth bound cover. But oh my God, I mean, God, just if anyone's listening, I mean, Dan Stevens, actually the English actor who does read a bunch of books, stories on my audiobook, he reads 10 Little Indians for Audible, and it is like his performance is absolutely insane, and it is so much fun. If you have not read that book, I really recommend listening to Dan Stevens perform it. It's just too much fun.
Yes, it's a great book. I mean, a lot of her stuff is problematic now in this world, which is also really interesting because I love the way that you address current culture with 1940s culture, with Ruby and her adjustment to this world. If everyone needs to read this book, but it has so many dimensions, it has some time travel, it has some just awesome stuff. It's amazing how deep you get into all this fun. There's so many fun aspects to the story. It's humor, it's character driven, but also there's like time travel. There's also just like there's like social commentary. There's so much packed into that one little story.
I appreciate it. You're right. I mean, actually, I guess the seed of it really was just I thought it would be such a funny, fun, rich fish out of water premise if a femme fatale, really hard boiled actress from the 1940s tried to make it today. That seemed like a very rich, fertile kind of like, okay, there would be a lot of clashing, there would be a lot of conflict, but then like that was. I mean, like the fun of it was exploring that clashing, which is really fun, and then also hanging out in that interior monologue of that character.
And I love how quickly, I mean, she's a fighter. Like, she's a character that's a survivor, and I think I really liked everything about her was so raw. And also, I love, and I don't know if you did it on purpose, but she's from Beaver Falls, which is the family lived there from Mr. Belvedere, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh.
Okay, wait a second, because I watched Mr. Belvedere. So I watched about 7 or 8 hours of TV from 1990 to 1997 because I would go after school. I went to the JCC for after school daycare. Mr. Belvedere was one of the shows on the lineup, and then I would go home and I would watch like 4 more hours in the basement.
Oh yeah,
and I'm from Pittsburgh, so
there you go. Yeah, Beaver Falls.
Beaver Falls. I didn't know Mr. Belvedere. Okay, so that's kind of funny. So he's fancy, but he's actually from Beaver Falls, and that's part of his thing. Okay.
I don't think he's from Beaver Falls. I think he shows up to the family. The family lives in Beaver Falls, and he shows up. They live in Beaver Falls, and it's Bob Euchre is the dad.
Yeah.
And I don't remember anything about the kids. I know there's Wesley is the son, and then there's a girl, and then there's a wife, and then.
Are you 36 years old?
I am early 40s.
What? Marty? Okay, guys, Marty looks so freaking young. I honestly thought you were younger than me.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay, I'm so sorry to put you on the spot. I was just
It's no wife, no kids. And it's...
That's too young.
And I sleep in Tupperware. And I sleep. I think sleeping is good. I have lots of friends who are my age that have like 3 kids, and they look like they're like 90. And it's just because they don't sleep anymore.
I don't know what to do because I know that it's the sleeping thing that really scares me because I love to sleep.
I love to sleep. Especially during the pandemic. Like my sleep schedule it's changed. Like I wake up at like 10:30 in the morning and I love it. It's wonderful. Definite. It's great.
Oh my God.
But I go to bed way too late. Like I stay up working until like 2:30, 3 o'clock. Okay. So I'm still sleeping the same amount, I think, but I just don't get up early anymore.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful.
I'm on West Coast time, Just say you're on West Coast time. That's what I always tell people. I'm like, I don't have time for this. I got meetings. I'm on West Coast time. You're in the entertainment industry. Have you been out to the West Coast a lot for work? Did you ever think about moving out there? Because that's where all the moving and shaking's always going on for comedy.
Yeah, I definitely have been out for work. And I did before I worked for The Onion, I briefly moved out there after I did this MFA at Northwestern for dramatic writing. And then I briefly moved out there and I was doing some horrible, crappy jobs and, like a writer's assistant job. It sucked so bad. For me with LA, I mean, I really, really enjoy visiting. And unfortunately now, most of my friends live there, and some of my bosom people live there. And so the problem is there's some non-starters for me with LA. I mean, I love winter and I love rain and I love bleak, incredibly bleak English weather. And so what am I going to do out there? It's a major problem.
You'd be way too happy all the time with that beautiful weather. I have a hard time going there, and I always think every time I go out there, I'm like, I need to move here. And then I'm there for a little bit longer, and then I come home, and then I'm like happy to be home. So it's kind of like a love-hate thing. Like when you're traveling there from New York for work, you don't live there. So like you're going out there and you have all this shit to do and you have all these meetings, and then you come home. But like that's not necessarily what it's going to be like when you actually live there, which is kind of like all of the time you're going to be kind of I have to drive a really long way to get to places and sit in traffic forever. And I always get into like if I'm driving in LA, I'm such a bad driver that everyone's always honking at me and giving me the finger, and I can't go left. And I'm just like I am like an old man. I'm just like I can't. I would rather walk. Like I've gone when I worked for a company for a long time that was based in Hollywood, and I would go out there, And I would be the only person who'd be walking on Sunset Boulevard, like, to the office.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'd be staying at a hotel down the street, like, by the Comedy Store, and I'd be walking up the street, and they're like, did you walk here? I'm like, yeah, it's not that far. They're like, Marty, no one walks in L.A. And I'm like, I did notice that. Like,
know,
it was just me.
You hear that, and I thought the exact same thing before I moved there. I mean, I lived there for sort of almost 2 years, and it was like, people said, no one walks. And I was like, okay, cool, but guess what? I will. And yeah, definitely no one walks. The only thing is, I mean, yeah, you can, if you live in one of those hoods like Los Feliz or Fairfax, I lived in Fairfax, you could walk around a little bit just in your little hood. But
right.
like, I mean,
you're not like, you can't like walk places. I took the bus and people were like, you took the bus? And I'm like, yeah, I got a bus schedule and I took the bus to Beverly Hills for some event. And like, they were like people who had lived there forever. They're like, I've never ridden the bus. I've never done this. And I'm like, well,
the bus is extreme.
I believe in public transportation. And now there's Uber. So now you just go in an Uber and Uber takes you everywhere and it's great. And you spend like $1 bajillion on Ubers when you're in LA. Because I won't rent a car because everyone honks at me. So Ubers are great. Love them.
I do too.
So what are you doing? So now that you've put out this big book, which is available now. Hold on. I'm pushing this button so people can see. If they're watching, they can see the video. They should buy the book now, big time. And it's by Penguin Random House, and there's an audiobook version, and you should get it, and you should put it on, I guess it's on Kindles and stuff. It's everywhere. The book's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's I got the hardback. Is there a process now where it comes out in paperback?
Yes. The paperback comes out July 5th.
Okay.
And yeah, and it will be the same book. But with some, floppiness added in, and some of the
typos are going to get fixed, stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, no, luckily that really, really I don't think I saw any, but they just add in some of like the sort of critical adulation. They add that in to help try to hype it.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, like all the reviews and stuff.
Exactly.
Fantastic. That's exciting. Yeah. Book stuff's fun.
Yeah.
And then, you've written a ton for The New Yorker. So when you put together a short story collection, how many things didn't make it into this book that you had an option of that you wanted to go into this book?
Yes, actually. So this book is all brand new stuff. We decided not to put any of my previously published stuff in there. Initially, we were going to. I mean, when I gave it to Random House and when we did the deal, they were like, I included stuff that I really liked that had already been published. And then when I was just giving them more and more, they were like, okay, why don't we, what would I say to just not putting any of that stuff in there? Because the new stuff I was writing is basically more substantive. They're heftier, longer stories. The stuff in the New Yorker it's really, really short.
Yeah.
And so I was excited by the idea of doing something that was much more like really legit, longer, short fiction versus like funny ha-has. So it's really not, it's not like one of those sort of jokey ones. I mean, there's maybe too many jokes, but there's
not too many jokes. I loved also The Boyfriend Identity. I think The Boyfriend Identity was a really fun story.
I am so glad that you think that. Thank you.
It was such a great, like, it's so, like, I could see, again, something like that being produced, and it would be like this over-the-top action movie, but it would be this guy, it would be very Jason Bourne, but he would be like made to be a boyfriend or a date for a wedding or whatever he's assigned to do, and then he has to go right back to the next assignment. I think that would be so much fun.
I'm so glad you're saying that. I mean, indeed, that one and Big Time were ones that I'm sort of trying to do some stuff with.
Those
like
two are definitely adaptable, like immediately adaptable. Netflix people, come on, Netflix. Pay attention to us. Your stock is dropping. You need something big, and this is going to lift you over the top. The streaming wars. Everyone's making movies. Like people are so obsessed with getting more and more content. So right now, it kind of seems like it's a good time to pitch things that are like this.
Yeah, it feels like it is. I mean, I certainly am doing that. So we'll just see where we land.
When you were at Northwestern.
For grad school, not for undergrad.
Where'd you go for undergrad?
Well, for undergrad, I went to Barnard. And I just have to draw the distinction because it's like, for where you go to grad school, you just don't it doesn't have that like emotional kind of like I belong to this place. But Barnard, I have that connection with. I love Northwestern. I love the program I did there, but I needlessly drew that distinction.
Because college is like when you're undergrad is more of a coming of age time.
Yeah,
and you're learning about being an adult, and you're trying to figure out what you're doing with your life, and there's a lot of things that are happening that are non-educational.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's and grad school is like more like you're already a little bit of like a sharpshooter going there to get trained on some specific skill.
It's like going to a technical school to learn how to do automotive and air conditioning repair.
Yes, exactly.
It's like a skill. It's like going to Lincoln Tech, but instead it's Northwestern.
Indeed.
And then you went to the Onion. So after Northwestern, what happened at Northwestern? You did comedy writing and then started doing stuff for the Onion just by submitting?
Yes, at Northwestern, I actually I was studying playwriting and screenwriting, and then but sort of like focusing more on plays, and then I ended up meeting a dude there, this guy, Andy Myra, who's so funny and smart. I haven't talked to him in a million years, but I really thought he was great. He was doing something for ONN, the Onion News Network, which now doesn't exist.
I loved ONN was so good. Those videos were genius. I loved the guy that was the anchor. Those were great. And then the fake morning show.
It's insane.
Those were insanely funny.
The fake morning show Today Now.
Today Now. Oh my God!
If you haven't seen Porkin' Across America, I would really highly oh God, Marty, you're gonna have so much fun. I'm giving Porkin' Across America.
I'm gonna write this down.
Chip Gaines. Wait, I said Chip Gaines. What's that guy's name? Today Now, the host. I forget. Anyway, the host of Today Now goes on this trip, tasting like barbecue across America, but weirdness. Yeah. So anyway,
one of the funniest things I remember from Today Now was a chef makes an omelet based on a dream he had.
Now it's funny that you say that, Marty. I thought that was I thought that was funny, but I have to say that tracks in that I'm annoyed. It's like a pet peeve of mine, creatively, of like I feel like dreams aren't like that. And it just annoys me when like dreams go really dolly and like really like surreal, and it's like, is that a dream?
I just remember he was making this omelet and he put like his keys in it, and it was so random.
I am such a snob because actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I remember when I first saw the video, I remember thinking, oh my God, that's so funny and that's so smart. And it's, I think, only in like seeing more things that like truck in the idea of dreams being this like, whatever. The surreal stuff. Okay, I shouldn't have have tried to beat you up about that.
You can beat me up. It's fine. It's just funny because like that, like it's when certain things are very funny and then they stick in your memory, and you don't know how certain things can stick in your memory because I'll forget a million things just today of things that I need to remember, but I'll remember the joke about the omelet and the keys for like the rest of my life, and I don't know why that is.
That, yes, I mean, well, because actually it was, as even if the observation that like dreams are surreal has maybe been done to death, I'd never seen it done like that, and that was really cool. And
it's like the whole Onion News Network, they're so dry, and like they delivered it so well, and the Onion's a wonderful platform, and then when you see them try to go and work with other networks, whether it was Comedy Central or they tried doing something on IFC. And just like all these little things, and then they don't do well because other people that are not Onion people are working on the projects, and it's just like the Onion. When you guys worked at the Onion, and I think I remember this when you did your talk at the Satire and Humor Festival, and you guys talked about like the factory, like it's a comedy factory of working at the Onion, and the way that you're trained, and the way that you have to spit out stuff, and it sounds like it really grinds people up. But you're trained in a way that is so like one note, but that note is so funny every time. Yes, well, it's really true that the I think the distinction between like the Onion people and really being in, I know that there's like a wide network of people that I think claim
having worked for The Onion, when maybe, they've contributed a few headlines,
Yeah.
most everything that you encounter, I mean, if is written by this core staff, and the core staff, I mean, their standard is so high. I remember being so impressed when I first got there. I mean, if two different writers come up with a headline idea that's a little too similar, but it's really, really funny, those ideas cancel each other out, because the thinking is just that if two people could think of this, it's too sort of first thought, and maybe sort of almost like lazy and obvious. And so, I mean, I think that their standard, their dedication to being really, like, to having takes that you're not going to see elsewhere, not to be like the takes still have to be like deeply resonant. They're not trying to be like fancy and tricky and too clever, but their standard is so high, and you are really, like, when you're there and you're one of those writers on that staff, like, you're working with other people that are so good, and everyone keeps you accountable. And there's no
I feel like the jokes are definitely that. You read an Onion headline and you're like, that is so funny, and I never would have thought of that. I feel like that's what the regular person thinks when they read The Onion, and that's why they keep reading The Onion, because it's something that you never would have had that thought. And and when you read it in The Onion, you're like, that thought is so simple, but it's so funny, and I never would have had that thought. And I think that's what makes it so wonderful.
You are so right. It's the simple ones, the ones that seem so low hanging.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and they make me just when I read them, I'm like furious, because I'm like, why didn't I think of that? It's like right there. It's like staring you in the face. And so, it's those ones are amazing. The really, really accessible, universal ones.
And then you went from The Onion. And how do you go from? So, did you live in Chicago for The Onion?
They had just moved to Chicago. It was this kind of like sad, dark time for them when they were like snatched out of New York and had to live in
That's
Chicago.
right, because for a very short time when they moved here during, I think it was just very pre 9/11, like a month or something like that. And there was a great retrospective of an oral history of when The Onion moved to New York City. I think it was done by Mel magazine, I think. Very good. I'll find I'll include the link in this, but I'll send it to you. It's great. But all the people that were moving from Wisconsin to New York, they all lived in Park Slope, which is where I live. And they called it like Little Wisconsin. And they all lived right around where I am now. And they kind of made a little neighborhood here. And then they ended up, I guess, moving right back to Chicago. And then you started working there. And what was that like, and how did you get in there?
Oh my God. I mean, it was, I loved it so much. I got in there because a dude that I had met at Northwestern was doing some work for ONN. And I just was asking around, like, I'm just going to plug in the computer, Marty, but I'm going to keep chatting.
Okay. I'll fill for time. I can sing and dance. I'll do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. No, I wanted to work at The Onion for a while, and I had like zero idea how. It just seemed like a band or something that was like, okay, it's a group of friends or something. Like, I don't know. But then this guy, Andy Myra, I heard he did some work for ONN, and actually, no, it was my friend Mark who knew Andy, but whatever. A friend of mine was doing some freelance work for ONN, and it was just someone who had like some tangential connection to The Onion. And I was like, I just want to apply. Could you ever so whatever. Someone sent me an email that was like, we're looking for fellows, because they do this fellowship thing where they have a bunch of contributors. Those are the people that just like, from wherever send in headlines, they email them in. And then they take on 2, or maybe now it's 3. When I did it, it was 2 fellows at a time. And we had like basically a 6-month residency where you're thrown in as a staff member, and they give you this pathetic stipend to live on, and you do all the work. And, then at the end of it, it's kind of like a really long audition. And then if they want you to stick around, then they just keep you around. And so that's what I did. And I worked really hard in the beginning. That is for sure.
And then how long did you stay at The Onion in Chicago before moving to New York? Did you move to New York because you got the Colbert job, or did you move to New York?
I did, which was it's so fun to move somewhere when you have a job. It's
Yes.
like the baller way of moving. So I was at The Onion for almost 3 years, and at a certain point, I just saw that Steven was taking over for Letterman, and I was like, Oh my God, I love him. I was a huge Strangers fan, and
Mhm.
yes, obviously a Colbert Report fan. And I just applied because everyone I knew in Chicago was applying. I mean, like anyone could get the email. It was just like an email that said, "Hey, we don't know what the show is. What do you think it should be?" And it was like so open ended, horribly open ended, and it was that was the coolest thing of getting plucked from a pile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you left. You come to New York. You're a writer for Colbert, and you're writing. And now, when does your voiceover skill come to pass? Like, how does that start? So you're writing, and when does the doing voiceover or doing anything with the voice start happening?
Yes, well, it starts pretty early at Colbert because Stephen had heard my voiceover on Onion videos. So
so you started doing voiceover at the Onion.
I did, and even that was literally. It's like this is one area where I have been such a lucky little doggy because at the Onion, someone literally just came up to me and was like, "Jen, like, would you want to like do voiceover for our videos?" And I was like, "Sure." And so I'd never done that, and it was, and so Stephen had. I also would write and direct.
Yeah.
A lot of our videos because
that's so great because people will throw people in just because it's easier to get someone who has a decent sounding voice who's here now and then going and farming it out and finding some voiceover person that you have to like try out or pay separately. They're like, "Hey, come here." It's great.
Yeah, I was very much a beneficiary of the sort of you are physically in front of my eyeball school of thought. Yeah, so yeah, I did those, and Stephen had heard them, and of course, Stephen was a big Onion fan, and so that must have put it in Stephen's mind. And then I think he also was like excited about having a woman do the voiceover because it is kind of cool. There's no other female late night announcer. There has never been. I am the first.
You definitely are, and I noticed that because I've been a big late night fan my whole life, all the late night shows, and I was a late night with David Letterman watcher. Like I would watch it after Carson, and Carson had Ed McMahon, and then Letterman had Alan Coulter later on, but earlier on he had what was the guy's name? He was great though. But everybody had an old man. Old man was always the announcer.
Right.
And now Jimmy Fallon has what's his name? He's like a producer on SNL.
Steve Higgins.
Yeah, Higgins.
Yeah,
Steve Higgins, and he's been around forever. But I mean, he does the whole thing, and I mean, Andy Richter was Conan's guy, and so it's always been a guy. And there's almost no female TV announcers. Like I remember for years ago, in my early days in New York, I worked at Letterman in the audience department, which was just like. I would talk to the audience, and I would be there late, and people would get to sit like in the front rows if they were doing TV stuff. I'd have to like talk to them before the show to see if they could be like TV ready type audience people. And the guy that would do the CBS voiceovers just for the TV shows, like like tonight on CBS, tonight there's no new late show, but it wasn't Alan Coulter. It was like the CBS network guy who would do the voiceovers, and he would walk in between the stuff. And it was always a guy. And, like, you never hear women doing any of the voiceovers for anything. So when and I didn't know that you were a writer. I didn't know that you were a comedy person. When I started watching Colbert, the first thing that stuck out for his new intro was that he had a female audience or announcer person who would be like, "Tonight on the Late Show." And it sounded great. It just had this difference that was so welcome. And your voice is so good that it was kind of like, coming up. So-and-so, and a whole new this. And it just like the whole package of like their intro was just so different and fresh.
Yes, exactly. Wait, Marty, I'm so glad you're mentioning it also because it's a good moment for me to even say, as I look at the clock, they own me at this hour because I do the voiceover still. And so 4 is when I'm going to have to sign off and do the announcement. Okay, yeah.
So how does that work? I want to hear. So every day you have to, they give you the stuff and then you just have to read it in and then you send it in?
Yeah, I just scream it, and they gave me all the equipment, and that we have it in the bedroom, and it's so beautiful. I do the open, whoever the guests are, and then there's a sort of news-based pun that will hype the monologue, the topical monologue, and that's new every day. And then there's also a podcast now, so I'll do the sort of intro, outro, and bumper stuff for the podcast.
That's awesome. And that's like a whole job. That's a whole job in itself. So it's like you have that
It's a
job,
whole
and then you have a
job,
comedy person job, and then you have an author person job.
You know,
So many
I know.
careers.
Well, it's a wonderful career for a writer, you know,
Yeah.
because like I can. It really is a nice like way to keep me independent and letting me have my own hours and all that.
And have you looked at doing anything else? Like, are you looking at doing? I want to do commercials. I want to do a voiceover for.
You know what? I do sometimes. I do sometimes. I'll get auditions. I'll do auditions for. I have done cartoon work for shows that Steven produces.
Oh yeah,
TV shows.
you're on. Is it My Cartoon President or Tuning Out the
Yes,
News?
it's our cartoon. Yes, wait, our cartoon president. And then there's a movie. Wait, what was the one? I was in. It's a movie. I'm so sorry that I forget the name of it. It's really bad that I am. But it's a Showtime. It's another thing on Showtime that Steven is the executive producer of. This wonderful, funny guy, RJ Freed, is the showrunner, writer, dude. But anywho, yeah, that stuff. But other like straight commercial money. I mean, I love money. I would do. I would do whatever. I don't care, anything.
Well, I'm going to let you go because you have stuff to do for your real job. But thank you so much for talking to me, Jen Spyra. Go read her book, Big Time. It's going to be coming out in paperback, and hopefully we're going to be seeing the larger story, Big Time, out as a movie or TV show very soon. And then we'll talk to you more when that happens. Great to talk to you today. This was so wonderful.
Ditto, Marty. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll be tuning into Colbert tonight to see what wonderful things you say.
Yes, I'm about to look and see who it is.
All right. Follow Jen online at Jen Spyra on Twitter and Instagram and all those places.
That's right. Just at Jen Spyra.
And she's wonderful. And go read all of her stuff. And thank you for talking to us today. All right. Bye, Jen.
Thanks for listening to Talkward. Please subscribe, follow us, and visit weeklyhumorist.com.